The first step to enhancing Excel and adding more functionality is to understand Visual Basic. Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA, is the programming language found in Microsoft products that allows you to add more functionality than the software is inherently capable of. VBA is commonly used in programs like Excel and Access that are data heavy, so we can speed up the data entry or data manipulation, data analysis processes. So it's a good tool to have when developing a database file so that you can build features that are unique to your specific needs and ensure that you have the functionality required to use your file efficiently. In a previous video, we showed how to set up the Developer tab to appear in your ribbon. So we're going to go ahead and click on that so we can see the VBA developer interface. The primary things we are interested in are the code and controls sections of the ribbon. The code section has the Visual Basic button, which opens the VBA window for you to write code in. It also has the macros button, which lets you directly run pre-written macros, and the record macro button to record your actions as you perform them to turn them into a macro for future use. The controls section is how you will build the user interface into your Excel file for your users to interact with the VBA indirectly rather than having to access your code, and this is discussed in a future video. For now, go ahead and open up the Visual Basic window by clicking on the Visual Basic button in the Code section, and that should look something like this. You can see over on the left-hand side of the screen there's the Project Explorer, which is this window here. This will list all of your user forms and macros that you have in this particular file. So ours is empty right now because we don't have anything in it, but this is the window that you'll usually use to navigate your VBA code that lives in your file. This lower window here is the Properties window, which will display the properties associated with whatever you have selected in the Project Explorer. The Properties window is really useful in Excel's version of VBA since it doesn't have an internal properties function for things like user forms, but it isn't as useful in programs like Access. So we'll be using this window a lot in Excel, but not necessarily in other Microsoft programs. Now we can look at the top of the screen here through some of these tools. Obviously this is the Save button, which I recommend you use often. And if we jump over here, we have the Undo and Redo buttons, which you can just use the Control-Z shortcut like you do in most other Microsoft applications. These buttons here, the Play, Pause, and Stop buttons, are going to be very useful when we talk about error proofing in a later video. These next two buttons just toggle between your Project Explorer and Properties windows. If you happen to close out of one of these, you can always bring it back by clicking on its corresponding button. And this third button here is really useful if you get stuck at any point during your code. This is the Object Browser, which will show you all of the terms and functions you can call from VBA. We'll talk more about this later, but keep it in mind in case you get stuck trying to figure out VBA terminology. Next, let's look at this Debug dropdown. The Debug dropdown has a lot of useful tools in it for trying to find the errors in your code and correct them, and we'll actually cover all of this in a later video. Next, let's look at the Insert dropdown. Here's where we can insert a user form, a module, or a class module. These are the items that will house your code in VBA in your Excel file. Let's go ahead and insert a user form and a module. We can see the user form and the module have both showed up in our Project Explorer window. So this will help us track what we've inserted into the file and toggle between the two. Generally speaking, user forms are what you build for the user to enter data or interact with that data indirectly. These forms have code that are tied directly to them, and we'll talk more about that later. Modules are where you put any code that isn't necessarily tied to a form, but you still want to use somewhere in your file. So in this video, we talked about the VBA interface and some of the key buttons and items we will be using. So now we are ready to start coding in VBA.